The massive alien ship hung in the sky above New York, like a silver leaf caught in the wind. People stood in streets, on rooftops, and pressed against windows, their phones pointed upward to capture humanity's first contact with an alien civilization. The date was October 15, 2045, and everything humanity knew about their place in the universe was about to change. Inside the United Nations building, Ambassador Greenleaf of the Unified Galactic Council stood before the General Assembly. The alien's tall, slender frame and pale green skin made them look almost plant-like, which wasn't far from the truth. Their species had evolved from photosynthetic organisms, like most of the Council's member races. "We welcome Earth into the galactic community," Greenleaf said through their translator. Their large eyes blinked slowly as they surveyed the room. "Our researchers have studied your history and culture extensively. We believe you are ready to join us among the stars." In the audience, Tom Walker, the U.S. representative, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Something about the alien's tone bothered him. It reminded him of how people talk to children. The meeting continued smoothly until they reached the cultural exchange portion. Greenleaf's assistant displayed images from Earth on the large screen. Cities, farms, technology. Then came a photo of Walker himself, taken last fall during deer season. He stood proudly beside a white-tailed buck, rifle in hand. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Greenleaf's skin rippled in what humans would later learn was an expression of extreme distress. "There must be some mistake," Greenleaf said. "Our data suggested hunting was a primitive survival method you abandoned centuries ago. Yet this image is recent." Walker stood up. "Hunting is an important tradition in many parts of America, Ambassador. It's carefully regulated and plays a vital role in conservation." The alien delegation whispered among themselves. Greenleaf's color darkened. "You mean you still deliberately track and kill other living beings for sport?" "It's not just sport," Walker tried to explain. "We manage wildlife populations, maintain ecological balance. And then there's this disturbing practice," Greenleaf continued, displaying an image of a man releasing a caught fish. "You torture creatures for amusement. Catch them only to release them." The UN erupted in murmurs. Representatives from other hunting nations, Canada, Russia, several African countries, began speaking all at once. But it was the American practices that seemed to disturb the aliens most. "In all our studies of predatory species," Greenleaf announced, their voice carrying over the chaos, "we have never encountered beings who hunt without necessity, who derive pleasure from the pursuit of other creatures. This is concerning." Walker looked around the room. Other representatives were distancing themselves from the American delegation, as if hunting was somehow shameful. His face grew hot. Standing up straighter, he addressed the alien ambassador directly. "With all due respect," he said, "you're missing the point. American hunters were among the first conservationists. We've saved countless species from extinction. We understand and respect the animals we hunt. We maintain their habitats. We ensure their populations stay healthy." Greenleaf made a gesture that might have been dismissive. "Yet you teach even your young to hunt. We've seen images of children learning to track, to shoot." "Yes," Walker interrupted. "We teach them to respect nature, to understand their place in it, to be responsible stewards of the land." But the aliens had already made up their minds. The next hour was filled with polite diplomatic speech that boiled down to one thing. Earth would be admitted to the galactic community, but with restrictions, heavy restrictions. As Walker left the UN building that evening, his phone buzzed. Messages were pouring in from hunting organizations across America. Word of the aliens' reaction was spreading, and people were angry. Not just at the restrictions, but at the fundamental misunderstanding of what hunting meant to their culture. He stopped on the steps, looking up at the alien ship still hovering in the darkening sky. The aliens thought they had humanity figured out. They thought they understood Earth's predators. But they had no idea what they were dealing with. In Montana, His friend Jack Thompson would be leading a guided hunt right about now. Jack, who could track a deer through a snowstorm, who taught inner-city kids about wildlife conservation, who'd probably forgotten more about nature than these aliens had ever learned. Walker smiled. The aliens thought hunting made humans dangerous. They were about to learn that it made humans something far more important. It made them guardians of the natural world. And Americans, they were the best guardians of all. 3 months after first contact, Jack Thompson stood at his cabin window in Montana, watching snowfall on the quiet forest. The alien restrictions had hit the hunting community hard. No off-world travel permits for anyone with a hunting license. Limited space travel for nations with strong hunting cultures. The message was clear. The aliens saw humans as too dangerous to trust among the stars. His sat phone buzzed. A message from Tom Walker in Washington. The news wasn't good. The Unified Galactic Council had just denied Earth's third appeal for equal colonization rights. Their reason? Humans couldn't be trusted not to hunt alien species to extinction. Jack's dog, Buck, raised his head from his bed by the fireplace as Jack pulled out his old hunting journal. Inside were years of notes, tracking patterns, animal behaviors, weather conditions. Real hunting wasn't about killing. It was about understanding, about being part of nature, not apart from it. That's when the idea hit him. 2 weeks later, Jack stood before the Earth Council Relations Committee in New York. The room was packed with both human and alien representatives. Ambassador Greenleaf sat in the front row, looking as uncomfortable as a vegetarian at a barbecue. The aliens think we're just killers, Jack said, his rough voice carrying through the quiet room. He wore his usual flannel shirt and worn jeans, standing out among the suits and formal alien wear. But real hunters are the best conservationists Earth has. So let's prove it. He laid out his challenge. The aliens had plenty of dangerous worlds they couldn't colonize, planets with predators too fierce to handle. Let us show you what human hunters can really do. A competition. Your best hunters against ours. Not just killing, but tracking, wildlife management, survival skills. Everything real hunting's about. The alien representatives chittered among themselves. One stood up, a tall being with blue-tinted skin who introduced himself as Skywatcher, their chief xenobiologist. You propose to prove your species' worth through more hunting. I propose to show you what hunting really means, Jack corrected. On Earth, we've learned to manage our wildest places, to keep the balance. That's what real hunting taught us. Skywatcher's compound eyes studied Jack carefully. And what would you want in return? Equal rights for Earth, no more restrictions based on our hunting culture, and recognition that understanding predators makes us better guardians, not more dangerous colonists. The debate lasted hours. Some aliens were horrified at the idea. Others, particularly those from frontier worlds, showed interest. Finally, Ambassador Greenleaf spoke. We have a suitable testing ground, they said reluctantly. Storm's Edge, a Class 9 predator world. No successful colony so far due to the indigenous apex species. Jack looked at the hologram they projected. A harsh world of forests and mountains, with predators that made Earth's look tame. Perfect. One condition, Greenleaf added. You must compete against hunters from 30 other worlds. Prove your methods against theirs. Agreed, Jack said without hesitation. But we do it our way. No energy weapons, no force fields, just traditional hunting tools and skills. The aliens murmured in shock. Even some humans gasped. Storm's Edge was notorious. Its predators could tear through advanced armor like paper. Going in with just traditional gear seemed like suicide. But Jack stood firm. That's our offer. Let us show you how real hunters work. As the committee argued, Tom Walker watched his friend with growing admiration. This was crazy enough to work. The aliens thought humans were primitive for still hunting. Now that very primitive knowledge might prove them wrong. When the vote came, it passed by a narrow margin. They had 3 months to prepare. 3 months to prove that being a predator species didn't make humans dangerous. It made them uniquely qualified to help manage the galaxy's wildest worlds. Walking out of the building, Jack looked up at the alien ships hovering over New York. Soon he'd be up there, heading to Storm's Edge. But his mind was already racing through preparations, selecting his team, planning their approach, thinking like both predator and prey. The aliens thought they were giving humans a chance to prove they weren't dangerous. Instead, they were about to learn why American hunters were the best conservationists in human history. And maybe, just maybe, in galactic history too. Storm's Edge lived up to its name. Dark clouds rolled across the purple sky as Jack's team made their final gear check. The air smelled like pine and wet earth, remarkably similar to Montana after a storm. But the massive trees around them, with trunks wider than houses, reminded them they were light years from home. The team consisted of 5 experienced hunters: Jack, Mike from Alaska, Bill from Texas, Dan from Michigan, and Robert from Idaho. Each had been chosen not just for their hunting skills, but for their expertise in wildlife conservation and tracking. At the base camp, 30 other alien teams prepared their high-tech gear. Some wore powered armor that could punch through steel. Others had weapons that could vaporize small buildings. The aliens watched in disbelief as Jack's team geared up with compound bows, traditional rifles, and hunting knives. "You'll die out there," a metallic voice said. Jack turned to see a tall, insectoid alien watching them. Its armor gleamed with built-in weapons. The Shadow Stalkers hunt in packs. "They've killed everyone who's tried to settle here." "Appreciate the concern," Jack replied, checking his compass. "But we've dealt with pack hunters before." The alien's antennae twitched. "Not like these. They're intelligent. They learn. Like wolves back home." Mike cut in, adjusting his bow. "Pack hunters are pack hunters. Don't matter if they're from Earth or out here." The competition rules were simple. Each team had 1 week to demonstrate their hunting and wildlife management skills. Points for tracking, successful conservation strategies, and handling dangerous situations. Killing was allowed only in self-defense or as part of approved wildlife management plans. As teams headed out into different sectors, Jack's group moved quietly into the forest. No fancy vehicles or hover platforms like the others, just boots on the ground, reading the terrain like their ancestors had done for generations. 3 hours in, they found their first tracks. Bill knelt by the massive 3-toed print in the mud. Fresh, big one too. Passing through about an hour ago. Jack studied the surrounding area. Broken branches high up showed the creature's height. Scraped bark indicated territory marking. The pattern was familiar, just like tracking grizzlies back home, just on a bigger scale. They followed the signs, moving silently through the underbrush. Other teams crashed through the forest with their powered gear, but Jack's group stayed quiet, watching, learning. They spotted their first shadow stalker at dusk. The creature was magnificent, 12 feet tall at the shoulder, built like a cross between a big cat and a bear, with dark scales that shifted color to match its surroundings. It moved with the silence of a mountain lion, despite its size. Through their binoculars, they watched it hunt, taking notes on its behavior. The alien teams were treating Storm's Edge like a battlefield. Jack's team treated it like what it was, a complex ecosystem they needed to understand. "Look there," Dan whispered, pointing to broken vegetation patterns. "They're herding the prey, just like wolves do." They spent the night in the trees, taking turns watching. In the morning, they tracked the shadow stalker to its hunting grounds. They found signs of 5 more, a whole pack, just as the insectoid alien had warned. But where others saw monsters, they saw patterns. The shadow stalkers were protecting their young. Their hunting grounds were carefully marked. They took only what they needed. "They're keystone predators," Jack explained into his recorder. "Just like wolves or tigers back home. They're not just killing machines. They're part of the balance." That evening, They watched an alien team in powered armor try to drive off a shadow stalker with energy weapons. The creature retreated, but Jack's team saw what the others missed. It was drawing the aliens toward the rest of its pack. "They need to pull back," Robert whispered urgently. "They're being hunted and don't even know it." Jack lifted his emergency radio. They weren't supposed to help other teams, but some things were more important than competition rules. As he warned the alien team, he couldn't help but smile. The aliens thought humans were just predators, but they were about to learn what any good hunter knew. True skill wasn't about dominating nature, but understanding it. Dawn broke over Storm's Edge with a deep purple light that filtered through the massive trees. Jack's team had spent 3 days studying the shadow stalkers, and what they'd learned had changed everything. The alien teams were still trying to prove their superiority over the planet's predators. But Jack's group had discovered something far more important. "Look at this pattern," Bill said, pointing to his hand-drawn map spread on a fallen log. Red marks showed shadow stalker territories, blue marks showed their hunting grounds, and green marked their breeding areas. They're not just hunting. They're managing the whole ecosystem. The shadow stalkers were like nothing they'd seen before, yet exactly like everything they knew. They culled the weak from prey herds, just like wolves. They marked territories to prevent overhunting, just like big cats. They taught their young to hunt efficiently, just like bears teaching their cubs. Mike pointed to a section of the map. They're keeping the balance. Each pack has its own ground, spaced just right to keep prey numbers steady. A loud explosion echoed through the forest, followed by alien shouts. Another team was trying to drag off a shadow stalker with force. Jack's team exchanged knowing looks. The aliens still didn't understand. "Time to show them," Jack said, packing up their gear. "Let's prove what real hunting knowledge can do." They tracked the sounds to a clearing where an alien team in powered armor was cornered by 3 shadow stalkers. The aliens' energy weapons had only made the predators angry. Worse, they were backing toward a den area Jack's team had marked on their map. "Hold your fire," Jack shouted to the alien team. The universal translator carried his words. "You're making it worse." The alien commander, a tall being with crystalline skin, turned toward them. "These beasts are too aggressive. We must show dominance." Jack's team spread out slowly, each moving with the careful steps of experienced hunters. No sudden movements, no threatening gestures, just calm, deliberate actions learned from generations of dealing with predators. "They're not being aggressive," Jack explained, keeping his voice steady. "You're too close to their den. They're protecting their young." The aliens' weapons hummed with power. "Then we should eliminate the threat." "No," Dan cut in. "Watch and learn. We'll show you how Earth's hunters handle this." Moving with practiced skill, Jack's team began to shift their positions. They used the wind direction, just like they would with mountain lions back home. They made themselves visible but non-threatening, like dealing with bears. They gave the shadow stalkers a clear path away from their den, the same technique that worked with wolves. Slowly, deliberately, they showed the aliens what generations of hunting knowledge looked like in action. Not domination, not force, understanding. The shadow stalkers watched them with intelligent eyes. After a tense minute, the largest one made a sound like distant thunder. Then, remarkably, they began to back away. Not in fear, but in acknowledgement. The den was safe. There was no need for violence. The alien commander's crystalline skin flickered in surprise. "How did you do that?" "Our studies showed they never retreat." "They didn't retreat," Robert explained, still watching the predators disappear into the forest. "They recognized we weren't a threat." Big difference. Jack turned to the alien team. "Real hunting isn't about killing or showing dominance. It's about understanding, reading behavior, respecting territory. That's what American hunters have been trying to tell you." The rest of that day, word spread through the competition. Other teams began coming to Jack's group for advice. They shared their maps, explained their observations, taught the basics of tracking and behavior, reading that any hunter would know. That evening, as they sat around their camp, a message came through from the competition judges. Their team had scored the highest points ever recorded for wildlife management and ecosystem understanding. The aliens were beginning to see that humans, especially American hunters, weren't just predators. They were something far more valuable. They were teachers. As night fell over Storm's Edge, a shadow stalker's call echoed through the darkness. But now it didn't sound threatening. To experienced hunters' ears, it sounded like acknowledgement. One predator species recognizing another, not as an enemy, but as an equal who understood the delicate balance of the wild. The thing about storms on Storm's Edge was that they weren't just weather. They were warfare. Purple-black clouds rolled in like battle tanks, bringing winds strong enough to snap the mighty trees. Lightning struck with the power of small nuclear bombs, and the rain fell in sheets thick enough to drown in. Jack's team had seen it coming hours before. The shadow stalkers' behavior had changed. They were moving to higher ground, gathering their young. Other predators were disappearing into deep caves. But most of the alien teams, relying on their technology instead of reading nature's signs, had missed these warnings. Storm's going to hit in about 2 hours, Jack radioed to competition control. A big one. The response was dismissive. Their weather satellites showed nothing unusual. Their advanced AI predicted clear skies. Their technology said everything was fine. But Jack's team knew better. They'd spent their lives reading weather signs, understanding how animals react to coming storms. When the bugs went quiet and the wind carried that metallic smell, you listened to those warnings. They were setting up their storm camp in a protected cave when the emergency signals started blaring. The alien team's satellites had finally spotted the massive storm system, but by then it was almost too late. Their fancy gear won't work in this, Mike said, securing their supplies as the wind began to howl outside. Electromagnetic interference from the storm will fry their systems. As if to prove his point, the cave lit up with a blinding flash. Thunder crashed so loud it shook rocks loose from the ceiling. And then the emergency radio crackled with dozens of distress calls. 3 alien teams were stranded in the lowlands. Their powered armor was failing. Energy weapons were useless. Hover vehicles were grounded. And worst of all, the shadow stalkers were on the move, driven by the storm into the same areas where the stranded teams were struggling. "We have to help them," Dan said, already checking his emergency gear. Jack nodded, pulling on his rain gear, just waterproof clothes and sturdy boots, nothing fancy. No powered armor, no energy weapons, just the tools and knowledge that hunters had relied on for generations. They split into 2 groups. Jack, Mike, and Bill would head for the closest stranded team. Dan and Robert would guide the others using emergency flares and their knowledge of the terrain. The storm hit full force as they moved out. Rain fell so hard it felt like being hit with gravel. Lightning turned night to day every few seconds. But Jack's team moved steadily, using the techniques passed down by hunters who'd faced everything from Alaskan blizzards to desert thunderstorms. They found the first alien team huddled in a hollow, their powered armor sparking uselessly. Above them, dark shapes moved in the storm. Shadow stalkers, drawn by the electrical discharge from their failing gear. "Strip off the armor," Jack shouted over the wind. "It's attracting them." The aliens were reluctant to abandon their technology, but another lightning strike that made their suits spark changed their minds. Jack's team showed them how to move quietly even in the storm, how to use the wind to mask their scent, how to read the ground to find safe paths in the darkness. More distress calls came in. Other teams were in trouble, but now they had help. The aliens Jack's team had rescued learned quickly, passing on the knowledge to others. Soon, groups were moving through the storm using human hunting techniques passed down through generations. As they guided another team to safety, Jack spotted something remarkable. The shadow stalkers were no longer hunting the aliens. Instead, they were watching, following at a distance, almost like they were learning too. One even seemed to be helping guide stranded groups away from dangerous ground, just as it would guide its own pack. By the time the storm began to weaken, every team had been brought to safety. There had been injuries but no deaths. And more importantly, something had changed. The aliens who had looked down on human hunting practices were now asking questions, learning, understanding. In the cave that night, as teams gathered to wait out the storm's end, Jack smiled as he heard alien voices discussing tracking techniques, weather signs, and animal behavior. They had come to prove humans weren't just predators. Instead, they had shown that being a predator, when combined with wisdom and respect for nature, was exactly what the galaxy needed. The storm had passed, but it left chaos in its wake. Trees older than human civilization lay broken across the landscape. Floods had carved new valleys into the terrain. And worst of all, it had disrupted the careful balance of Storm's Edge's ecosystem. Jack's team picked up the first warning signs at dawn. The planet's smaller prey animals were fleeing, all moving in the same direction. The shadow stalkers were acting strangely too, their packs gathering in unusual numbers. "Something's wrong," Bill said, studying fresh tracks in the mud. "They're scared. All of them." They got their answer when the competition base camp sent an emergency alert. The storm had destroyed the hunting grounds of multiple shadow stalker packs. Now those packs, driven by hunger and desperation, were heading straight for the base camp where most of the alien teams had gathered to repair their equipment. The alien commanders wanted to set up defense lines with their heaviest weapons. They talked about culling the predators to protect themselves. But Jack's team knew that would only make things worse. "You'll start a war you can't win," Jack argued in the emergency meeting, "and you'll destroy the very ecosystem this competition was meant to study." The crystalline alien commander from before spoke up. "Then what do you suggest?" "Let them eat us." Jack spread out their wildlife management maps. "We do what rangers and hunters do back home when natural disasters disrupt predator territories. We give them a better option." His team explained their plan. It was the same technique they used when wolf packs or bear populations were forced into conflict with human settlements. You didn't fight nature. You worked with it. They picked 4 team members from different alien species who had shown the most aptitude for Earth hunting techniques during the storm. Together with Jack's team, they began the dangerous work of territorial restructuring. Using their knowledge of predator behavior, they identified new hunting grounds that could support the displaced packs. They used scent marking techniques learned from Earth's big cats to establish boundaries. They even showed how controlled burns, a technique used by American land managers for centuries, could help create new grazing areas for prey animals. But their most important task was handling the hungry shadow stalker packs heading toward the base camp. This would prove whether humans truly understood predator management, or if the aliens had been right about them all along. "Remember," Jack told the combined human-alien team as they positioned themselves between the approaching packs and the camp, "we're not here to fight. We're here to guide." They used everything they knew: controlled fires to direct movement, strategic placement of scent markers, even recordings of shadow stalker territorial calls, played in patterns they'd learned from studying the creatures. The largest shadow stalker pack arrived first. Their leader, a scared giant they'd nicknamed Old Storm, stood at least 15 feet tall. The alien team members raised their weapons, but Jack's team remained calm. "Watch," Jack said quietly, "just like dealing with grizzlies back home. Confident but not threatening. Let them know this isn't their territory, but show them where they can go." For a tense hour, humans and aliens worked together to guide the shadow stalkers away from the camp and toward the new hunting grounds. They used flares to mark safe passages, just as they would guide elk herds in Montana. They demonstrated the same patient, steady pressure that generations of hunters had used to manage wildlife movement. Remarkably, it worked. The shadow stalkers, intelligent enough to recognize the guidance being offered, began moving toward the new territories. By sunset, the crisis was over. The packs were settling into their new hunting grounds, and the base camp was safe. In the evening debrief, the alien commander who had wanted to fight asked Jack how they had known it would work. "Because real hunters understand something you don't," Jack replied. "We're not separate from nature. We're part of it. And when you're part of something, you learn to work with it, not against it." As night fell, they heard the shadow stalkers calling from their new territories. But this time, not even the aliens felt afraid. They were finally beginning to understand what humans, especially American hunters, had known all along. Being an apex predator wasn't about dominance. It was about responsibility. The final day of the competition dawned clear and bright on Storm's Edge. Jack's team stood with the other competitors in the great hall of the base camp, waiting for the unified Galactic Council to announce their decision. The hall was packed with beings from 30 different worlds, but the room was quieter than a forest before a storm. Ambassador Greenleaf stepped onto the raised platform, their skin-shifting colors in what humans now recognized as deep thought. Behind them, a massive view screen showed images from the past week. Teams working together during the storm, the successful relocation of the Shadow Stalker packs, and the newly established wildlife management zones. "When we created this competition," Greenleaf began, "we thought we were testing humanity's capacity for restraint. We were wrong. We weren't testing their predatory nature. They were teaching us about responsibility." The ambassador gestured to the screen, which now showed Jack's hand-drawn wildlife maps next to the high-tech scanning data from alien teams. "The humans, particularly the American team, showed us something we have forgotten. True strength isn't in dominating nature, but in understanding it." The crystalline commander stepped forward, their armor still bearing scars from the storm. "My people have colonized 12 worlds," they said. "We thought we knew everything about handling dangerous wildlife. But we never considered simply listening to what the creatures were telling us." Old Storm's image appeared on the screen, the massive shadow stalker standing at the edge of its new territory. The alien teams murmured in appreciation, no longer in fear. They had learned to see what hunters saw, not a monster, but a vital part of a living system. "The competition points are clear," Greenleaf continued. "Team Earth not only scored highest in wildlife management and ecosystem understanding, but they also taught these skills to others. They turned a competition into a collaboration." Jack stood quietly, feeling the weight of his worn hunting knife on his belt, the same knife his grandfather had used, passed down along with the wisdom of generations of hunters. He thought about all the nights spent learning to read tracks, to understand animal behavior, to respect the balance of nature. Therefore, Greenleaf announced, "The Council has made 2 decisions. First, all restrictions on human expansion into space are lifted, effective immediately." A cheer went up from the Earth delegates, but the ambassador raised their hand for silence. "Second, and more importantly, we request that human hunters, particularly those trained in American wildlife management techniques, serve as consultants for all future colonization efforts on worlds with dangerous wildlife." The room erupted in applause. Even the most skeptical alien species had come to appreciate what humans brought to the galaxy, not just their strength or their skills, but their understanding. After the ceremony, Jack found himself surrounded by alien team members, all asking questions about hunting techniques, tracking methods, and wildlife management. He smiled, remembering how they had first looked at his traditional gear with dismissal or contempt. "You know," he told them, "back home, there's an old saying among hunters. You don't manage wildlife from an office. You've got to have boots on the ground." The crystalline commander nodded in understanding. "We had forgotten that wisdom," they said. "We relied so much on technology that we stopped listening to the wilderness itself." As the teams began to pack up for departure, Jack took one last walk to the observation platform. In the distance, he could see several shadow stalkers moving through their new territories. They moved with purpose and confidence, predators secure in their place in the natural order. A young alien approached him, one who had learned Earth tracking methods during the storm. "Will you teach us more?" they asked. "About how to read the land, understand the creatures. Jack smiled. That's what hunters do, he said. We pass on what we know. Not just about hunting, but about being part of nature, about responsibility. As their ships lifted off from Storm's Edge the next morning, Jack looked down at the wild planet below. The aliens had thought humans were too predatory to trust. Instead, they had learned that being a predator, understanding predators, was exactly what the galaxy needed. They had come to prove humans weren't dangerous. They had ended up proving something far more important, that the very things that made humans seem dangerous were actually their greatest gifts to share with the stars.